Welcome back to day two, unit one, the giver, Harrison Bergeron. If you're watching this video, that means you have successfully completed part one of Harrison Bergeron and you have a complete understanding of what's going on in the story. I'm going to continue reading the story and still modeling some of my thinking this time, but you'll have some questions in the educator video to actually stop and complete. But before we actually start the continuation, we definitely need to review plot. Every good story has to have a plot, of course. And what makes up a plot? Exposition, rise in action, climax, fall in action, resolution, and of course, a good conflict. Please quickly review all of the questions that are being asked for each part of the plot diagram. Exposition. Who are the main characters in the beginning of the story? What is the setting of the beginning of the story? We know this already. You should be able to answer these two questions very easily. Rise in action. What events happened after the exposition and before the climax? What you had to read yesterday, it built up to the climax. You had to actually stop right at the climax. And if you have not figured out the climax by now, you should know that it is, I'm not going to tell you. You have to figure it out on your own. Fall in action. Well, climax. What does the main character face? Their problem. When does the main character face a problem? This is the turning point of the story. Things will never be the same for the character. Fall in action. What happens immediately after the climax? And then resolution. What happens at the very end of the story? Conflict. What is the major problem in the story that the character is experiencing? So let's continue to read. I am going to go back and I'm going to click on my story. And remember, you also have a hard copy of this that you had for homework. I'm going to go down to the part where you actually had to stop reading, and I'm going to pick up there. A police photograph of Harrison Bergeron was flashed on the screen upside down, the sideways, upside down again, then right side up. The picture showed the full length of Harrison against a background calibrated in feet and inches. He was exactly 7 feet tall. The rest of Harrison's appearance was Halloween and hardware. Nobody had ever borne heavier handicaps. He had outgrown hindrances faster than the HG men could think them up. Instead of a little ear radio for a metal handicap, he wore a tremendous pair of earphones and spectacles with thick, wavy lenses. The spectacles were intended to make him not only half blind, but to give him weighing headaches besides. Scrap metal was hung all over him. Ordinarily, there was a certain symmetry, a military neatness to the handicaps issued to strong people. But Harrison looks like a walking junkyard in the race of life. Harrison carried 300 pounds. And to offset his good looks, the AG men required that he wear at all times a red rubber ball for a nose, keep his eyebrows shaved off, and cover his even white teeth with black caps at snaggletooth random. If you see this boy, said the ballerina, do not, I repeat, do not try to reason with him. There was the shriek of a door being torn from its hinges. Screams and barking cries of consternation came from the television set. The photograph of Harrison Bergeron on the screen jumped again and again, as though dancing to the tune of an earthquake. George Bergeron correctly identified the earthquake, and while he might have, for many was the time his own home had danced at the same crashing tune. My God, said George, that must be Harrison. The realization was blasted from his mind instantly by the sound of an automobile collision in his head. When George could open his eyes again, the photograph of Harrison was gone. A living, breathing Harrison filled the screen. Clanking, clownish, and huge, Harrison stood in the center of the studio. The knob of the uprooted studio door was still in his hand. Ballerinas, technicians, musicians, and announcers cowered on their knees before him, expecting to die. I am the emperor, cried Harrison. Do you hear? I am the emperor. Everybody must do what I say at once. He stamped his feet, and the studio shook. Even as I stand here, he bellowed, crippled, hobbled, sickened. I am a great ruler than any man who ever lived. Now watch me become what I can become. This author of Harrison Bergeron is really using a good technique to build up what we call suspense. We don't know as readers what is about to happen. By him just describing Harrison's looks and his gestures and what he's doing, it makes us want to know really what is about to happen. So that's called suspense. Harrison tore the straps of his handicap harness like wet tissue paper. Tore straps guaranteed to support 5,000 pounds. Harrison's scrap iron handicaps crashed to the floor. Harrison thrust his thumbs under the bar of the padlock that secured his head harness. The bar snapped like celery. Harrison smashed his headphones and spectacles against the wall. He flung away his rubber ball nose, revealed a man that would have awed Thor, the god of thunder. I shall now select my empress, he said, looking down at the cowering people. Let the first woman who dares rise to her feet claim her mate and her throne. A moment passed, and then a ballerina arose, swaying like a willow. Harrison plucked the metal handicap from her ear, snapped off her physical handicap to marvelous delicacy. Last of all, he removed her mask. She was blindingly beautiful. Now, said Harrison, taking her hand, shall we show the people the meaning of the word dance? Music, he commanded. The musicians scrambled back into their chairs, and Harrison stripped them of their handicaps too. Play your best, he told them, and I'll make you barons and dukes and earls. The music began. It was normal, at first cheap, silly, false, but Harrison snatched the two musicians from their chairs, waved them like batons as he sang the music as he wanted it played. He slammed them back into their chairs. The music began again and much improved. Harrison and his empress merely listened to the music for a while listened gravely, as though synchronizing their heartbeats with it. They shifted their weights to their toes. Harrison played his big hands on the girl's tiny waist, letting her sense the weightlessness that would soon be hers. And then, in an explosion of joy and grace, into the air they sprang. Not only were the laws of the land abandoned, but the law of gravity and the laws of motion as well. They reeled, whirled, swiveled, flounced, capered, gamboled, and spun. They leaped like deer on the moon. The studio ceiling was 30 feet high, but each leap brought the dancers nearer to it. It became their obvious intention to kiss the ceiling. They kissed it. And then neutraling gravity with love and pure will, they remained suspended in air inches below the ceiling, and they kissed each other for a long, long time. It was then that Diana Moon Clampers, the handicapped general, came into the studio with a double-barreled 10-gauge shotgun. She fired twice, and the emperor and the empress were dead before they hit the floor. Diana Moon Clampers loaded the gun again. She aimed it at the musicians and told them that they had 10 seconds to get their handicaps back on. It was then that the Bergeron's television tube burned out. Hazel turned to comment about the blackout to George, but George had gone out into the kitchen for a can of beer. George came back in with the beer, paused while handicap signal shook him up, and then he sat down again. You been crying? He said to Hazel. Yep, she said. What about? He said. I forget, she said. Something real sad on television. What was it? He said. It's all kind of mixed up in my mind, said Hazel. Forget sad things, said George. I always do, said Hazel. That's my girl, said George. He winced. There was the sound of a riveting gun in his head. Gee, I could tell that was one doozy, said Hazel. You can say that again, said George. Gee, said Hazel. I could tell that one was a doozy. The end.